Right, can things be saved with Les Miserables? Not that one, the new one.
Not that one doesn't help, given that there are an awful lot of films with this name, if you find
not
if you
the other
try
one
to look
either.
up on IMDb.
Yes.
The suburban Paris commune of Montfermeil is famous as the location of Monsieur et Madame Thénardier's inn in Victor Hugo's Les Miserables, and the place of its writing, and infamous in more contemporary times as the location of the Les Bosquets banlieue, or housing estate. It is here that Mali-born French director Lage Lee's Les Miserables is set, a film that begins by showing throngs of people watching, then celebrating France's 2018 World Cup victory. Notable is the fact that many of these people are, or are children of, immigrants, largely from Africa, pointedly showing that, despite the belief of many, these people are French. That it then shows the title, which can be translated simply into English as The Miserable Ones, over the cheering crowds filling the Champs-Élysées, gives an equally pointed idea of Lee's cynicism. The story of the film begins with the first day in the job of newly transferred police officer Stéphane Ruiz, Damien Bonnard, who will work with Alexis Manenti's Chris and Jibril Zonga's Guada as a squad of the anti-crime unit, whose job is, ostensibly, to prevent crime, but seems to actually consist of bigotry, racism, harassment, chauvinism, and a general low-grade rottenness to the inhabitants of Les Bosquets, perhaps even extending to a little light corruption, if the sweltering heat doesn't disincline them. Ruiz is shocked by their behaviour, but as the new guy feels unable to do much about it. Not least because the squad leader, the Sergeant Chris, seems to have the support of their captain, and the fact that within minutes Chris has dubbed him Greaser because of his hair, to denigrate him and put him in his place. A leisurely paced first hour paints a portrait of the estate and the power dynamics at play within it, including the popular local mayor, Steve Tienchu, and the assumed shadow power of Almemi Kanute's gangster turned faithful Muslim Salah, and how they all interact with the police. Tensions begin to rise, though, when an armed group belonging to a circus drive into the estate, threatening to burn it to the ground and commit murder if the kidnapped Johnny is not returned. Johnny, it turns out, is a lion cub, and he's been stolen by Issa, played by Issa Purica, a quite committed juvenile delinquent. After identifying the lion snaffler, the squad attempt to arrest him and head off the danger of a race-driven battle between the circus workers and the Les Bosquets inhabitants. And that's when things go, in the parlance of our times, tits up. The squad are harassed and pelted with missiles by the group of young people Issa was playing football with, and in the confusion, a police flashball goes off in Issa's face. This is further complicated by the fact that the whole thing has been recorded by a drone owned by a child from the estate. A series of standoffs and chases then take place as Chris and Guada try to recover the drone's footage, and the mayor, having got wind of the incident, tries to get a hold of it himself to serve his own ends, and a child's potential life-threatening injuries take a back seat. But even when things seem resolved, they're far from it, and injured pride, frustration, anger, and simmering resentment set the scene for a violent finale. It's a powerful film, though you might be inclined to think that it's a bit heavy-handed at times and over the top. However, it would probably be useful to know that, in the director's own words, the whole film is witnessing what I witnessed as a teenager. Everything in it is inspired by real events, from the first scene to the very last scene. That last scene, in fact, is based on something that Lee, who started filming and documenting Les Bosquets at 17, actually filmed. It is even shot in the very stairwell where the incident took place. And even the lion thing really happened. Les Miserables is, perhaps surprisingly, relatively balanced, especially in the figure of Ruiz as a decent police officer. Again, in the director's own words, the idea was not to take sides against the police, despite everything that happened in reality. I wanted to be even-handed. Everyone, people who live on the estate and the police, they are all Les Miserables. This is not to say that the police are let off, far from it, but the director could have chosen to excoriate them, but didn't. The film brings to mind Matthew Kassavitz's 1995 La Haine, an acknowledged influence on the director, and there's a real vitality to Les Miserables, and a real sense of place to its depiction of Les Bosquets. much of that owing to Lashley's documentary background, and some also to the 200 extras, every single one of whom lives on the estate. Where it perhaps suffers is that, while the banlieue certainly has a character, for the featured humans that's much less the case. It would be great to see an exploration of the bullying, small-minded Chris, and even more so the clearly conflicted Guada, a child of African immigrants himself, but content to be complicit in the sergeant's behaviour. It's a place that really probably deserves a TV series, one that could more fully explore its interactions and the internal and external factors that influence it. But it's certainly something I very much recommend watching. And I'll just finish with a passage from the preface of Victor Hugo's novel that gives an excellent flavour of Lashley's message. So long as there shall exist, by reason of law and custom, a social condemnation which, in the face of civilization, artificially creates hells on earth and complicates a destiny that is divine with human fatality, so long as the three problems of the age, the degradation of man by poverty, the ruin of women by starvation, and the dwarfing of childhood by physical and spiritual night, are not solved, so long as, in certain regions, social asphyxia shall be possible. In other words, and from a yet more extended point of view, so long as ignorance and misery remain on earth, books like this cannot be useless. And you could perhaps just exchange books for films there.
Yes, I was rather fond of this. This is one of those good films that you hear about. You don't necessarily see them all that often, but yeah, some really compelling raw performances. The storyline's great, healthy dose of social commentary, which makes it a very heady mix, and it's got a lion cub. What could possibly be better than that? A
tiger cub.
That's true. They're cool. In fact, just puppies. Anyway, basically we're saying that this film should have contained more baby animals. No, I mean, aside from just being an enjoyable film on its own terms, this is, again, I don't like to throw it around, but yeah, it's an important work considering the ongoing discourse in quotation marks about, whether or not black people should or should not be allowed to be gunned down by the police with impunity, and whether or not those displaced by the consequences of imperialism and unchecked capitalism should be allowed to settle in the places that are responsible for said displacement. Perhaps by my completely neutral framing of those questions, you can tell where I fall on those issues. But ultimately, my recommendation is, of course, that you should watch this film, and we must seize the means of production. And furthermore, I consider that Carthage must be destroyed. Look, there's really an awful lot to like here. I quite enjoyed it. It's not perfect. There's a few things that, they didn't need to be tied up, but there's points that kind of are introduced and don't seem to go anywhere. Like, early on, it's Guada, I believe, who seems to be sexually harassed by his boss, the female police chief, but then that doesn't go anywhere. And then later on, you bring up the Muslim Brotherhood's kind of introduced at points in it, and I thought they were trying to be set up as like a third axis in the sort of a vying for control of the banlieues between them and the police and the travellers and I guess the mayor. The mayor's guys as well, but they kind of just more or less vanish out into the background, which is fair enough. It's not completely clear where all the kind of the kids decide to just out of nowhere form their own cooperative in favour of beating up policemen. That seems to come out of nowhere a bit, as well as there's not really implied that they have that kind of level of forethought and expertise. But I don't think any of that actually hurts the film. In many ways, it makes it a more interesting and more compelling watch that, like life, it's all a bit messy. There's no simple solutions to anything, and all this is interconnected in a weave of a tapestry of misery and nonsense. So yes, it's a really enjoyable film with lots of really great performances and a really enjoyable story to pull everything through. And I enjoyed it a great deal. Yes, it was good. I recommend it.
It's why a lot of the points you're making is very much why I would think that this would actually really benefit from being like a mini-series.
Yeah, doing a kind of City of Men style follow-up to City of God, that kind of thing. Yeah,
something like that. Or I've seen it compared in some ways to The Wire, and I can kind of see where it's coming from.
Yeah.
The way it portrayed Baltimore. Because, like, the Muslim Brotherhood in this, they are actually quite a minor role, and they're portrayed as either somewhere between benign or possibly benevolent. And maybe they are, because the most that I know about the Muslim Brotherhood was when they come to power in Egypt, and that was a very different thing.
Yeah.
I assume it's the same organisation, not just the same name. But they were shown like they were just trying to, get the kids off the street, and they wanted to go to the hospital. Christian groups do all that all the time, and there are problems with just getting kids involved in religion at all that I have. But it could just be benign. There's people who just generally care about the welfare of these kids, or it may be like you're saying, like there's actually more of a power play sense where we're a bit strong, but certainly kind of a hearts and minds influence kind of thing going on there. A mini-series could really be able to explore that. But so that's much more frustration, because I think this is clearly a place that has a lot of stories to tell.
Oh, yes, yes.
And because Ladgley comes from this very community, and these are all based on his true experiences, that you could have a really, really strong series in there, I think, without losing any of the mirrored reality of it. But as a film, it's just that those are kind of frustrations, because you'd like to learn more. And for a 2-hour film, it's still really packed.
Yes. So
yeah, that's the only problem. But it's a really good film. I think I hadn't heard of this. I only watched this because it was on Radio 4's The Film Programme a couple of weeks ago.
Right.
I thought, that sounded really interesting, so I decided to watch it for this episode of the podcast, and I was like, oh, I'm glad I did, because this is smashing.
Yes.
I mean, it's bleak in many ways, but it's very, very good and very, very worthwhile watching.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, no, I don't have anything else to add to that, really. It is a very good film indeed.